Father of King George III, Part 3. Prince Frederick, son of King George II and Queen Caroline, had a tumultuous relationship with his parents, marked by bitterness and public humiliation. Despite later attempts at reconciliation, his early actions and animosity with his mother and father had lasting consequences, ultimately leading to a troubled legacy for his son, King George III. Queen Caroline possessed an extensive network of informants which quickly alerted her to her despised son's actions. She promptly hurried to St. James's Palace, accompanied by Frederick's former best friend, Lord Hervey. Once there, she took the opportunity to shower the new parents with insults. Reportedly, the Queen made it abundantly clear how delighted she was that they had welcomed a poor, ugly little she-mouse, as nobody would mistake an illegitimate girl as a legitimate heir. If there was a beginning to Frederick's relationship with his parents, this marked its bitter end. Following the birth of Frederick's daughter, Queen Caroline virtually disowned her son and harboured nothing but contempt for her daughter-in-law. Recognizing that everything Augusta did was orchestrated by Frederick, Caroline once derided, "Poor creature, were she to spit in my face, I should only pity her for being under such a fool's direction and wipe it off." Her most venomous remarks, however, were reserved for her own son. The extent of the animosity between Frederick and Caroline is difficult to exaggerate. On one occasion, she delivered one of history's cruelest insults to her son. According to Lord Hervey, she once spotted Frederick walking and exclaimed, "Look, there he goes, that wretch, that villain. I wish the ground would open the moment and sink the monster to the lowest hole in hell." Imagine hearing those words from your own mother. Now imagine your mother was the Queen of England. Nevertheless, Frederick had more mischief in store, particularly concerning his father. Around this time, public support for Frederick's parents began to dwindle, particularly as his father frequently left the country and his mother assumed more regent duties. At one point, a prankster posted a notice on one of the royal residences, humorously critiquing George. "Lost or strayed out of this house, a man who has left a wife and 6 children." For Frederick, it must have been a source of petty delight. However, more was in store for him. The end of 1736, Frederick's father hurried back from a trip to Hanover in an attempt to placate his disgruntled subjects. Tragedy struck en route. The king's ship encountered a severe storm, and many feared that he had perished. Rather than feeling a shred of grief, Frederick perceived this as a cunning opportunity. Reports of the king's demise had been greatly exaggerated, and King George II returned to England in 1737, alive but physically drained. He was feverish and urgently required rest. This was precisely when Frederick seized his chance. The Prince of Wales fueled rumours by asserting that the king was genuinely on his deathbed. He then sat back and watched the ensuing chaos unfold. As the news spread, everyone assumed that Frederick, being the king's son, was a reliable source. The court was thrown into a panicked frenzy over the news. This effectively compelled King George to leave his sickbed and attend a social event to prove that he was not, in fact, dying. Frederick must have taken immense satisfaction from this turn of events. However, as Shakespeare reminds us, these violent delights have violent ends. Frederick was about to learn this firsthand. With the family discord looming large, his parents delivered the ultimate blow. In the latter part of 1737, they banished Frederick, Augusta, and their child from their court. The Prince and Princess of Wales packed their bags and moved to Leicester House, far removed from the epicentre of monarchy. As it turned out, this marked the final battle in the lifelong war between Frederick and his parents, because neither Frederick nor his mother had much time left. Just weeks after Frederick's relocated to Leicester House, tragedy struck the royal family. Queen Caroline fell suddenly ill, her condition diagnosed as a strangulated bowel. To put it succinctly, this was a fatal ailment at the time and a painful way to pass. For days, the Queen endured excruciating agony, awaiting her impending demise. When Frederick received the news, it broke even his resilient spirit. Despite a lifetime of sneering at his parents' tribulations, the looming death of his mother proved too much for Frederick to bear. He approached his father and requested permission to see the Queen and perhaps to make amends. The response he received was heart-wrenching. The king, with Caroline's blessing, denied Frederick access to her chambers. However, she conveyed a message through him. The precise nature of Caroline's sentiments towards her wayward son in her final hours remain a mystery, but she did send a message to a politician expressing her forgiveness towards him. Then again, this could have been a masterstroke of passive aggression of Caroline's part, effectively winning their feud once and for all. Her subsequent actions certainly seem to suggest as much. When Queen Caroline passed away on the 20th of November 1737, her husband King George II and the rest of the palace were deeply saddened. Her funeral took place at Westminster Abbey about a month later, but conspicuously absent from the guest list, perhaps as Caroline's wishes, was her eldest son, Frederick. A regrettable situation indeed. Nevertheless, the remaining years of Frederick's life were about to take an unexpected turn. Following his mother's death, Frederick seemed to undergo a significant transformation for the next decade or so. He adopted a more responsible and respectable lifestyle, settling into life at Leicester House. He and Augusta went on to have a large family with 9 children, including the future King George III. Several surprising developments unfolded during this time. In the 1740s, a remarkable event occurred. Frederick and his father reconciled to some extent. While this reconciliation was primarily driven by political impendency, as the Jacobite rebellion posed a potential succession crisis in Scotland, their relationship improved enough that Frederick and Augusta became regular attendees at court functions. However, just as his mother Caroline, any reconciliation came too late. In March 1751, at the age of 44 and seemingly in good health, Frederick likely suffered a sudden pulmonary embolism and passed away while at home in Leicester House. This event sent shockwaves through the kingdom. At the time, Augusta was 32 and pregnant with their 9th child. Her world was suddenly turned upside down and chaos ensued. Augusta, Frederick's newly widowed wife, was deeply affected by his passing. At 32, she was devastated upon hearing the news. According to her doctor, she had difficulty believing it, and her attendants spent hours trying to convince her of the reality. However, not everyone mourned his loss. Following Frederick's death, his father, King George II, showed little grief and arranged a modest funeral for his late son. It seemed that the reconciliation had mostly been for appearances, and George II remained largely indifferent to Frederick's passing. This fulfilled Frederick's long-standing desire to remove his least favourite son from the line of succession. Nevertheless, Frederick's legacy lived on, thanks to an unexpected source. Princess Augusta had grown considerably since her marriage to Frederick. Recognizing her dependence on King George II's favour to secure the throne for her eldest son, Augusta humbled herself before the monarch. Her efforts were successful, as she reportedly charmed the king to the extent that he appointed her as regent if he were unable to rule and her son was still too young. This was an achievement Frederick had failed to attain during his lifetime, ultimately contributing to his son's accession as King George III. However, in hindsight, this may not have been a favourable outcome. In the end, Frederick's lineage was marred by a dark chapter. King George III, as history now knows, became Mad King George. Suffering from either porphyria, or more likely bipolar disorder, George III endured recurring bouts of mania in adulthood, characterized by frothing at the mouth, incoherent speech, and prolonged periods of instability in England. This was not the legacy Frederick would have desired for his son. Remember, the stories of the past people shape our present and future. Keep exploring history, and I'll see you next time on Past People.